July 24, 1945. The Oval Office. A single sheet of paper rests beneath the summer light filtering through bulletproof glass. It's a draft order, 3 paragraphs, a list of German cities, a blank space where a presidential signature would authorize the atomic obliteration of millions. Harry Truman stares at it. Outside, Washington swelters. Inside, history holds its breath. The order was never signed. Germany surrendered 11 weeks earlier. But for months before that collapse, America's most classified weapon had a second target list, one that would have turned the heart of Europe into radioactive ash. This is the story of the atomic bomb that almost fell on Germany, of scientists who built doomsday and prayed they'd never use it, of generals who planned the unthinkable, and of a surrender that arrived just in time to prevent the incineration of Berlin. December 1942. A freezing laboratory in Chicago. Enrico Fermi watches the world's first nuclear reactor achieve a sustained chain reaction. Champagne corks pop. Scientists shake hands. But beneath the celebration runs a darker current. These men know exactly what they've just made possible. And they know exactly who it's for. When the Manhattan Project was conceived, Nazi Germany wasn't just a target. It was the target. Hitler's regime had sparked the entire atomic race. Albert Einstein's famous 1939 letter to Roosevelt warning of German nuclear research directly triggered American mobilization. The nightmare scenario wasn't hypothetical. It was German physicists unlocking the atom first. So from day one, every calculation, every enriched uranium gram, every billion-dollar facility built in secrecy across Tennessee and Washington state, all of it pointed toward Germany. General Leslie Groves, the project's military commander, made this explicit in internal memos. Target committees met throughout 1943 and early 1944 discussing German cities. Berlin, Hamburg, Frankfurt, Munich, all evaluated for their strategic value, population density, and psychological impact. The scientists building the bomb understood the stakes viscerally. Many were Jewish refugees who'd fled Nazi persecution. Leo Szilard, who conceived the nuclear chain reaction, had escaped Hungary. Edward Teller fled Hungary too. Hans Bethe came from Germany itself, his family torn apart by racial laws. For them, this wasn't abstract warfare, it was personal. But there was a problem, a technological one that would reshape history. The Manhattan Project was racing against 2 clocks. The first was German surrender. The second was the bomb's completion. By mid-1944, the Allies were crushing Germany from both directions. D-Day had succeeded. The Soviets were advancing from the east. Every intelligence report suggested the Third Reich was collapsing faster than anyone predicted. Yet the bomb wasn't ready. The gun-type uranium weapon wouldn't be viable until summer 1945 at earliest. The more complex plutonium implosion design, which would become Fat Man, faced technical hurdles that made physicists at Los Alamos wake up screaming. A horrifying arithmetic was emerging. Germany might surrender before we could bomb it. May 1945. Germany has surrendered. Adolf Hitler is dead. The European war is over. At Los Alamos, scientists expected jubilation. Instead, they felt a creeping dread. Because the bombs were still being built. The machinery couldn't stop now. 3 years of labor, $2 billion, 130,000 workers sworn to secrecy, all of it converging toward weapons that no longer had their intended target. But there was still Japan. The Target Committee, a group of military officers and scientists, convened on May 10th and 11th in Robert Oppenheimer's office. Their mission: select Japanese cities to destroy. The shift was clinical, dispassionate. The same analytical framework developed for German targets simply pivoted east. They needed cities between 3 and 15 miles in diameter, urban areas not yet damaged by conventional bombing, so the atomic weapons' effects could be properly measured. Centers of war production, psychological impact zones. Kyoto topped the initial list. Ancient capital, cultural heart of Japan, population over 1 million. But here's what haunts the historical record. Many scientists never wanted this pivot. Leo Szilard, who'd spent 3 years building the bomb to stop Hitler, was horrified. He began circulating a petition in July 1945, signed eventually by 70 Manhattan Project scientists, urging Truman to demonstrate the weapon on an uninhabited area rather than drop it on civilians. The petition explicitly referenced the fact that Germany was the original target and argued that the moral calculus changed when facing a nearly defeated Japan that hadn't threatened nuclear annihilation. Szilard wrote to a colleague, "We built this thing to prevent a Nazi bomb. That threat no longer exists. What are we doing?" James Frank, a Nobel laureate working on the project, chaired a committee that produced the Frank Report, a passionate plea against using the bomb on cities. The report warned that dropping atomic weapons on Japan without warning would spark a catastrophic nuclear arms race and damage America's moral standing. But the military and political leadership saw different variables. The invasion of Japan, Operations Olympic and Coronet, was projected to cost hundreds of thousands of American lives, possibly over 1 million Japanese casualties. The firebombing campaigns had already killed more civilians than the atomic bombs would, yet Japan fought on. Secretary of War Henry Stimson removed Kyoto from the target list, concerned about destroying such a culturally significant city. But Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Kokura, and Niigata remained. And then there was the other calculation, one whispered in classified briefings but rarely documented. The Soviets were about to enter the Pacific War. If Japan surrendered to Soviet invasion rather than American atomic power, the post-war balance would shift dramatically. Demonstrating the bomb's power now would send a message to Stalin as much as to Tokyo. The weapon built for Hitler was about to be used in a completely different war, for completely different reasons. But what if Germany hadn't surrendered in May? Let's rewind. Imagine a different spring. It's April 1945. Berlin hasn't fallen. Hitler hasn't died in his bunker. German resistance stiffens along the Rhine. The Soviets bog down in urban warfare through Prussia. The war grinds on. And in New Mexico, the Trinity test succeeds on schedule. This isn't fantasy. It's the scenario American planners actively prepared for throughout late 1944 and early 1945. Classified documents from the Target Committee's earlier sessions reveal the German city target list in granular detail. Berlin capital, symbolic and psychological devastation, population 2.9 million, though millions had fled by 1945. Hamburg major port, submarine production, population 1.7 million. Frankfurt transportation hub, industrial center, population 550,000. Munich Nazi Party birthplace, armaments production, population 840,000. The criteria mirrored what would later be applied to Japanese cities. Urban centers between 315 miles in diameter, strategic military or industrial value, dense civilian populations that would demonstrate the weapon's psychological impact. But there were differences too, crucial ones. Germany was being invaded by multiple Allied armies on the ground. Any atomic strike would risk fallout affecting American, British, or Soviet troops. The targeting had to account for moving front lines. More significantly, there was the radiation question. By early 1945, Manhattan Project scientists understood the bomb would create lasting radioactive contamination. They knew soldiers would eventually occupy bombed areas. European cities, unlike remote Pacific islands, would need to be administered after the war. Would America really irradiate the heart of Europe, poisoning the ground Allied forces would have to hold? Robert Oppenheimer later said the German target scenario haunted him more than Hiroshima. Germany was white, Christian, the cultural motherland of millions of Americans. The psychological barrier to atomizing Berlin was higher than bombing an Asian enemy most Americans knew only through racist wartime propaganda. But would that barrier have held if the war dragged into August 1945? In this alternate timeline, Truman receives the draft order in July. Germany is still fighting. American casualties mount daily. The Soviets are seizing more territory every week. The order sits on his desk, 3 paragraphs, a list of cities, and a blank signature line. Los Alamos, July 1945. The alternate timeline where Germany survives to see the bomb. Niels Bauer walks through the compound at dawn, unable to sleep. He's thinking about Copenhagen, his home city, and what it would look like as a shadow burned into radioactive rubble. The scientists who built the bomb for Hitler are now confronting what they've actually created. In our real timeline, many Manhattan Project physicists wrestled with guilt after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but using the bomb on Germany would have fractured them differently, and perhaps more completely. These weren't just physicists. Many were refugees, German speakers, people with relatives still trapped in Europe. Hans Bethe had family in Germany. Victor Weisskopf had studied in Göttingen. Even those without direct connections felt the cultural ties more acutely. Bombing Japan involved dehumanization easier for 1940s America to stomach. But Germany, that was the country of Beethoven, Goethe, Kant, of universities where half the Manhattan Project scientists had trained. Enrico Fermi later told an interviewer, "If we'd had to use it on Germany, I don't know how many of us would have stayed on the project." There were practical concerns too, beyond the moral ones. The German scientific community, though depleted by Nazi purges, still contained brilliant minds. Werner Heisenberg, though his reactor program failed, understood nuclear physics as well as anyone. If Germany saw an atomic bombing coming, would they detonate their own radiological weapons? Dirty bombs were within German capability even if full atomic bombs weren't. And then there was the Soviet problem. Stalin had spies throughout the Manhattan Project, Klaus Fuchs, David Greenglass, others unknown. The Soviets knew America was building atomic weapons, but using them on Germany would demonstrate their power right on the Soviet border. Would Stalin feel threatened enough to accelerate his own program? Would he demand shared occupation of German territory to secure atomic intelligence? The post-war order could shatter before the war even ended. General Groves understood this. In memos from early 1945, he expressed concern that atomizing German cities could backfire diplomatically. The British and French had to occupy Germany after surrender. Irradiating major cities would complicate that immensely. But military logic has its own momentum. If Germany somehow stabilized the Eastern Front through late summer 1945, perhaps through mass conscription of Volkssturm units and scorched earth tactics, the pressure to use atomic weapons would become immense. American casualties from conventional warfare would mount. Public opinion would demand action. Truman, who never saw combat and always deferred to military judgment, would face generals insisting the bomb could end the war immediately. The draft order would move from possibility to probability. And somewhere in Los Alamos, scientists who fled the Third Reich to stop a Nazi bomb would watch their weapons burn their former homeland to ash. Could they have lived with that? May 7, 1945, 2:41 a.m., a schoolhouse in Reims, France. General Alfred Jodl signs the German instrument of unconditional surrender. His hand trembles. His face is gray. Europe doesn't know it yet, but this signature just prevented its atomic immolation. 74 days later, July 16, 1945, the Trinity test illuminates the New Mexico desert. The world's first atomic explosion, a miniature sun rising at 5:29 a.m., turning night into noon, melting sand into green glass. The bomb works. If Germany had still been fighting, the order would have been typed that week. Truman would have faced the decision within days. But Germany was already gone, Hitler dead, the Wehrmacht dissolved, the Third Reich a memory. So the atomic bombs, born from the fear of Nazi science, fell instead on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered 6 days after Nagasaki. The world entered the nuclear age. But here's the haunting question historians still debate. Would the bomb have ended the European war faster, or made the aftermath infinitely worse. Consider the fallout, literal and metaphorical. Berlin, Hamburg, Frankfurt irradiated. Millions dead instantly. Millions more from radiation sickness in the following months. Soviet troops advancing through contaminated zones. American forces occupying poisoned cities. The Marshall Plan, which rebuilt Europe into a democratic bulwark against communism, would have faced irradiated wastelands. Could West Germany have been integrated into NATO if its major cities glowed? Would Stalin have demanded a share of atomic weapons as the price for his cooperation? Would the Cold War have started hot? We dodged this timeline by 11 weeks. The Manhattan Project's original purpose never materialized because Germany collapsed under conventional forces before atomic weapons existed. The scientists who fled Hitler never had to watch their weapons destroy their homeland. Instead, they watched something else, and many of them spent the rest of their lives regretting it. Leo Szilard never worked on weapons again. He devoted himself to biology and arms control. J. Robert Oppenheimer, after becoming father of the atomic bomb, fought nuclear proliferation and lost his security clearance during the Red Scare. Hans Bethe campaigned against the hydrogen bomb. They'd built Prometheus's fire to stop the ultimate evil, but evil collapsed on its own, and the fire burned anyway, just in a different direction. There's a document in the National Archives, a working draft, Target Committee minutes from November 1944. It lists German cities and their coordinates. Someone drew a line through each city name in red pen. Next to the list, a handwritten note, targets obsolete as of 5/8/45. That red line saved Europe from atomic fire and condemned 2 Japanese cities instead. In the end, the order that would have nuked Germany was never written because it didn't need to be. The Wehrmacht broke, the regime crumbled, the 1,000-year Reich lasted 12. But it came shockingly close. 74 days. That's how long Germany missed atomic annihilation. If Hitler's regime had held through just one more summer, if the Bulge had succeeded, if the Rhine defenses held, if desperation tactics bought another season, Berlin would have joined Hiroshima in the annals of nuclear horror. Instead, Europe was rebuilt, Germany was reborn. And the draft order remained forever unsigned, a ghost document from a nightmare timeline we barely avoided. The atomic bomb changed warfare forever, but the war that sparked its creation ended just weeks before the weapon existed. This channel, World War II Ember, is dedicated to uncovering these incredible moments where history pivoted on the thinnest margins, where everything could have gone differently. If you found this story as haunting as we did, hit that subscribe button. Ring the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into World War II's most fascinating what-ifs and forgotten truths. Drop a like on this video if you want more long-form documentary storytelling that treats history with the depth and nuance it deserves. And here's a question for the comments. Do you think Truman would have signed that order if Germany had survived to July 1945? Would America have nuked Berlin? Tell us what you think below. Let's discuss. Thanks for watching. Remember the stories, question the easy answers, and we'll see you in the next one.